Evicted and widowed, a desperate mother planned to quickly sell a dilapidated inherited farm just to survive. But a cryptic note led her to a rotting shed, concealing a massive family secret that would change her life forever. Stay with me until the end, because some stories don't just change the people who live them, they change the people who hear them. Funny thing about losing everything, it never happens all at once. For Jennifer Brooks, it began. The morning she watched a stranger change the locks on the front door of the house she had called home for 16 years. Just 3 weeks earlier, she had stood beside her husband's grave, wondering how she would ever learn to live without him. Now she was wondering where she and her 9-year-old son would sleep that night. Her mother-in-law didn't raise her voice. She didn't have to. The legal papers said enough. The house belonged to the Brooks Family Trust, and Jennifer had 72 hours to leave. She folded Noah's favorite blanket, packed 2 suitcases, and carried a small box filled with family photographs. It wasn't much, just enough to hold the pieces of a life that no longer existed. As they drove away, Noah looked back through the rear window. "Mom, will Dad know where to find us?" Jennifer smiled, because she couldn't bear to do anything else. "I think he always will." For the next few weeks, they lived in an aging silver SUV. Every morning before sunrise, Jennifer wiped the condensation from the windshield, helped Noah button his school shirt, and reminded him that better days were coming. Every evening, she told him they were just on a little adventure. Children have a beautiful way of believing the people who love them. Jennifer prayed he would believe her a little longer. Then, on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon, her phone rang. A lawyer she had never met told her that her grandmother, Eleanor Whitfield, had left her 11 acres of land in rural Vermont. There was an old farmhouse, an abandoned apple orchard, and a weather-beaten wooden shed standing quietly at the edge of the property. Jennifer didn't hear opportunity. She heard survival. If she sold the land, she could pay her debts. She could rent a small apartment. She could finally give Noah a bed instead of the back seat of a car. When she arrived at the farmhouse a few days later, the lawyer handed her one final envelope. Inside was a single handwritten sentence from her grandmother. "Before you sell this land, open the old shed." Jennifer folded the note and slipped it into her pocket. At that moment, she believed her grandmother had left her a piece of land. She had no idea she was about to inherit something far more valuable than anything money could ever buy. The next morning arrived wrapped in silence. Not the lonely silence Jennifer had grown used to in empty parking lots. This was different. The kind that settles over old places where time seems to move a little slower. Sunlight slipped through the kitchen windows, casting long golden stripes across the worn wooden floor. Somewhere outside, a breeze stirred the branches of the apple orchard, sending a few late-season leaves drifting gently to the ground. For the first time in weeks, Jennifer woke up without the sound of passing traffic. Noah was already standing at the window. "Mom," he whispered, pointing toward the orchard. "Is that the shed Grandma wrote about?" Jennifer followed his finger. There it was, a small, weathered building standing alone beneath a row of towering maple trees. Its faded red paint had nearly disappeared beneath decades of rain and snow. One shutter hung crooked. The roof sagged slightly, yet somehow it didn't look forgotten. It looked as though it had been waiting. Jennifer smiled faintly. "Maybe we'll look inside before we leave tomorrow." She still planned to sell the farm. Nothing had changed. At least that's what she kept telling herself. After breakfast, she and Noah walked across the property. The grass reached almost to Noah's knees. Wild flowers grew where neat garden paths had once been, old apple trees bent beneath the weight of fruit no one had picked. Some apples had already fallen, filling the air with the sweet scent of autumn. "It's beautiful," Noah said. Jennifer looked around. It used to be. Then she caught herself. Maybe it still was. As they reached the shed, Jennifer noticed something unexpected. The door wasn't locked. It had only been secured with a simple iron latch, darkened by age. She hesitated. "Grandma wanted us to come here first," Noah reminded her. Jennifer nodded. Slowly, she lifted the latch. The old wooden door groaned as it swung inward. Dust danced through shafts of morning sunlight. The room smelled of cedar, dry paper, and time itself. Jennifer expected to find rusty tools, broken furniture, and forgotten boxes. Instead, everything inside was astonishingly neat. Shelves lined the walls. Old gardening tools hung exactly where someone had left them years ago. A wooden rocking chair sat near the window with a folded quilt resting across its back. Nothing looked abandoned. It looked preserved, almost as if someone had expected visitors. Noah wandered toward an old workbench. "Mom, you should see this." Resting on the table was a small brass lantern. Beside it lay a pair of reading glasses, a faded pocket watch, and a single envelope. Across the front, written in elegant handwriting, were only 3 words. "For my family." Jennifer's heartbeat quickened. She carefully opened the envelope. Inside was another handwritten note from her grandmother. "If you're reading this, then you've honored my only request. Thank you." The things inside this shed are not valuable because of what they're worth. They're valuable because they tell the truth. Please don't rush. Some stories need to be discovered, one page at a time. Jennifer lowered the letter without speaking. She suddenly understood why her grandmother hadn't explained anything. This wasn't meant to be inherited in a single afternoon. It was meant to be experienced. Noah looked toward the far corner of the shed. "Mom." "Oh, what's that?" Half hidden beneath a white linen cloth stood a large cedar chest. Its brass corners had darkened with age. Unlike everything else in the room, the chest was locked. An old iron key rested on top. Jennifer picked it up. The metal felt surprisingly warm in her hand. For reasons she couldn't explain, she didn't unlock it right away. Instead, she sat quietly beside the chest, listening to the wind outside. It felt almost disrespectful to rush, as though the people who had filled this room with their lives deserved a few moments of silence before their story was told. Finally, Jennifer took a slow breath. She slid the old key into the lock. A soft click echoed through the shed. The lid creaked open. Inside were dozens of carefully tied bundles of letters, leather-bound journals, yellowed photographs, pressed flowers tucked between pages, and on top of everything, a black and white photograph of 3 smiling young people standing together beneath the very same apple trees outside. Jennifer frowned. She recognized her grandmother. She recognized her grandfather. But the third person, she had never seen him before, and somehow she had the unmistakable feeling that this stranger was about to change everything. Jennifer carefully lifted the old photograph from the top of the cedar chest. The edges had yellowed with time, but the faces were still clear. There was her grandmother, Eleanor, smiling with the kind of joy Jennifer had only seen in childhood memories. Beside her stood her grandfather, William, his arm resting comfortably around her shoulders, and standing between them was a young man Jennifer had never seen before. He couldn't have been older than 30. He was laughing, not posing for the camera, laughing as though whoever stood behind the lens had just told the funniest joke in the world. "What do you think his name was?" Noah asked. Jennifer slowly shook her head. "I don't know." That answer unsettled her more than she expected. Families remember people, especially the people who appear in cherished photographs. Yet, in 42 years, Jennifer had never heard anyone mention this man. She turned the picture over. Only one sentence had been written in fading blue ink. Some families are built by birth, others are built by courage. Jennifer read the words again, then again. Something about them refused to leave her mind. She carefully placed the photograph beside the chest and untied the first bundle of letters. The earliest one was dated October 1968. The handwriting belonged to her grandmother. "Dear Thomas," Jennifer stopped. Thomas. The stranger finally had a name. She continued reading. The first few letters seemed ordinary enough. They spoke about autumn harvests, fresh apple pies cooling on the kitchen windowsill. The first snowfall, neighbors stopping by with homemade jam. It all felt warm, comforting, like opening a forgotten family album. But then the tone slowly began to change. "I know people have begun asking questions. Please don't blame yourself. Some hearts simply refuse to understand what kindness looks like." Jennifer frowned. She reached for another letter, then another. Every answer seemed to raise two more questions. Thomas wasn't a visitor. He wasn't a hired farmhand, and he certainly wasn't a distant relative. He was here almost every day. He worked beside William in the orchard. He shared family dinners. He celebrated birthdays, Christmases, harvest festivals. His name appeared over and over again, as naturally as if he had always belonged there. Yet Jennifer had never heard it spoken once. Noah looked up from another stack of photographs. "Mom, I think he's in all of these." Jennifer walked over. He was right. There was Thomas repairing fences, Thomas teaching neighborhood children how to carve pumpkins, Thomas sitting beside Eleanor on the farmhouse porch, both of them laughing at something outside the frame. There was even a photograph of Thomas holding a newborn baby, Jennifer's mother. She stared at it for several long seconds. He held the baby with remarkable tenderness. Like family, not a guest. Family. Jennifer's pulse quickened. Something wasn't adding up. She searched deeper inside the chest. Beneath the photographs rested 3 leather-bound journals. The first belonged to Eleanor. The second belonged to William. The third had no name written on the cover, only a pressed apple blossom tucked beneath its worn leather strap. Jennifer reached toward it instinctively. Before she could open it, a folded envelope slipped onto the wooden floor. It had never been sealed. Across the front, in her grandmother's unmistakable handwriting, were 6 simple words. "Read this only after finding Thomas." Jennifer's breath caught. Finding Thomas. She looked around the silent shed. The words made no sense. Thomas had lived more than half a century ago. Surely he was gone. Unless her grandmother hadn't meant finding the man. Perhaps she meant finding his story. Hands trembling, Jennifer unfolded the letter. It was shorter than she expected. "If you've come this far, then you've already met the man our family chose to forget. The world called him many things. We called him family. Before you judge what happened next, promise me you'll hear every voice before deciding the truth." Jennifer lowered the page. Outside, the wind stirred the old apple trees. The branches scraped softly across the roof of the shed, almost like whispered voices. For the first time since arriving in Vermont, selling the farm no longer seemed important. The debts, the apartment, the life she had planned, all of it suddenly felt very far away. She looked back at the nameless journal resting inside the cedar chest. Whatever was written in those pages, Her grandmother had protected it for more than 50 years, and Jennifer realized something that sent a chill through her. The real inheritance had never been the land. It had always been the truth. Slowly, she reached for the journal and opened the first page. Jennifer sat in silence for a long time before turning the first page of the journal. The paper was fragile beneath her fingertips, its edges softened by decades of careful handling. The handwriting was different from her grandmother's, steadier, more deliberate. There was no name on the first page, only one sentence. If you are reading this, then Eleanor finally believed the world was ready to know who I really was. Jennifer glanced toward the faded photograph lying beside the cedar chest. Thomas, this had to be his journal. She took a slow breath and continued. The first entries told the story of a young man who had arrived in Vermont with nothing more than a suitcase and a broken heart. His parents had turned him away. His hometown had whispered about him. Friends who once welcomed him no longer returned his letters. He never explained exactly why. He didn't have to. Every line carried the quiet loneliness of someone who had spent years searching for a place where he could simply exist without fear. Then came one sentence that made Jennifer stop reading. The day William invited me to supper was the first time in years someone looked at me without asking me to apologize for being myself. Jennifer slowly lowered the journal. She stared out through the open doorway of the shed. Beyond the orchard, Noah was chasing fallen leaves across the grass, laughing as the wind carried them just beyond his reach. A lump formed in her throat. She knew that feeling. Not Thomas's entire story, but the feeling of standing somewhere you no longer belonged. Only a month earlier, she had been told to leave the home where she had spent 16 years loving a family that no longer wanted her. No one had shouted. No one had insulted her. They had simply decided she no longer fit. The pain of being unwanted rarely needed cruel words. Silence could be just as sharp. Jennifer opened the journal again. As the pages turned, Thomas wrote less about himself and more about Eleanor and William. They never treated him like a burden. He worked beside William in the orchard every morning. He helped Eleanor bake pies for church fundraisers. On Sundays, the three of them would sit beneath the old apple trees long after sunset, talking about books, music, and the kind of future they hoped the world might one day become. Jennifer smiled without realizing it. She had expected secrets. Instead, she found kindness. Not dramatic, not loud, just ordinary acts of compassion repeated over and over again until they became extraordinary. Another passage caught her attention. People often believe courage means standing in front of crowds. They're wrong. Sometimes courage is simply setting one more plate on the dinner table, even when the neighbors might never forgive you for it. Jennifer read those words twice, then a third time. Something inside her shifted. For weeks, she had measured her life by everything she had lost: her husband, her home, her security, her future. But this journal wasn't asking what had been taken away. It was asking a different question. What kind of person do you choose to become after everything is gone? Outside, Noah pushed open the shed door. He carried 2 small apples in his hands. "One for you," he said, with a grin. Jennifer accepted the apple. It wasn't perfect. One side was bruised. Its skin was marked by tiny scratches. Yet somehow it tasted sweeter than any apple she could remember. Maybe because it had been freely given. Noah looked around the shed. "Do you think Great-Grandma wanted people to remember this man?" Jennifer looked toward Thomas's photograph. "I think she wanted people to remember how he was loved." For the first time since arriving in Vermont, Jennifer realized she no longer wanted to rush through the journals. The overdue bills waiting in her purse suddenly felt less urgent. The real estate agent she planned to call could wait another day, maybe another week. Some stories deserved patience. Some lives deserved to be remembered exactly as they had been lived. As the afternoon light stretched across the orchard, Jennifer stepped outside and looked back at the weathered old shed. When she had first seen it, she had thought it was simply another forgotten building on a piece of land she intended to sell. Now she understood something her grandmother had known all along. The shed had never been protecting old belongings. It had been protecting a family's conscience. And for the first time in many years, Jennifer no longer felt as though she had come to Vermont looking for a way to escape her past. She had come to discover the kind of future her grandmother had quietly been preparing for her all along. The next morning, Jennifer did something she hadn't planned to do. She called the real estate agent. When he answered, she apologized politely. "I'm going to need a little more time." There was a brief silence on the other end. "I thought you wanted to list the property this week." "I did." Jennifer looked through the kitchen window toward the old shed, "but I think my grandmother left me something I haven't finished opening yet." The agent laughed softly. "As long as you understand the market could change." "I know." For the first time in months, Jennifer wasn't making a decision based on fear. She hung up the phone and slipped it into her pocket. The farm wasn't going anywhere. Neither was the story waiting inside that cedar chest. That afternoon, she and Noah returned to the shed, carrying nothing more than a broom, a bucket of warm water, and a quiet sense of purpose. Without saying much, they began cleaning. Jennifer dusted the old shelves one by one. Noah carefully wiped each picture frame before placing it back exactly where he had found it. Every object seemed to belong there. Nothing felt random. It was as though Eleanor had arranged the room not for storage, but for someone someday to walk in and understand. By late afternoon, sunlight poured through the clean windows, filling the little building with a warm golden glow. It no longer looked forgotten. It looked welcoming, Noah smiled proudly. "It feels alive now." Jennifer looked around. "No," she said softly. "I think it always was." That evening, while preparing dinner, there was a gentle knock on the farmhouse door. Standing outside was an elderly woman carrying a homemade apple pie. "My name is Martha Collins," she said with a warm smile. "I lived next door to your grandmother for nearly 40 years. Jennifer invited her inside as they shared coffee around the old kitchen table. Martha's eyes wandered toward the orchard. "I was wondering when someone would finally open that shed." Jennifer looked up. "You knew about it?" Martha nodded. "Oh, everyone in town knew about the shed, but your grandmother rarely spoke of what was inside. She used to say that some stories aren't meant to be inherited until someone has lived enough life to understand them." Jennifer felt a chill run through her. Martha smiled gently. "Your grandmother loved that place, not because of the letters, because of what they reminded her to become." Those words stayed with Jennifer long after Martha had gone home. The following days settled into a peaceful rhythm. Every morning, Jennifer read another handful of letters. Every afternoon, Noah explored the orchard, collecting unusual stones, colorful leaves, and fallen apples. Sometimes he sat quietly beside Jennifer while she read. Sometimes he asked questions no adult had thought to ask. "Do you think Thomas ever felt lonely? Did great-grandma know he was sad? Did people ever tell him he didn't belong?" Jennifer answered, as honestly as she could. "I think they probably did." Noah looked toward the shed. "I'm glad Grandma didn't." Jennifer smiled. "So am I." Word slowly began to spread through the small town that Eleanor Whitfield's granddaughter had returned. Neighbors stopped by with fresh vegetables. A retired carpenter offered to repair the farmhouse porch. Another neighbor volunteered to replace a broken window in the shed. No one asked for payment. They simply remembered Eleanor's kindness. Jennifer began to understand something beautiful. Her grandmother's greatest legacy had never been measured in acres. It had been measured in people, in friendships, in quiet acts of generosity that continued long after she was gone. One afternoon, while organizing another stack of journals, Jennifer noticed several empty shelves lining one wall of the shed. For the first time, an unexpected thought crossed her mind. What if this place wasn't meant to remain a secret forever? What if it could become a place where forgotten stories were finally heard? A place where families could preserve letters, photographs, memories before they disappeared with time. The idea seemed impossible. Yet the more she thought about it, the more it felt exactly like something Eleanor would have wanted. Jennifer looked around the little wooden shed. Just days earlier, she had seen an old building standing on land she intended to sell. Now she saw something entirely different. Not a storage room, not a forgotten structure, but the beginning of a purpose she had never expected to find. And for the first time since losing her husband, Jennifer allowed herself to imagine a future she wasn't afraid to hope for. By the end of the second week, something inside Jennifer had begun to change. It wasn't dramatic. There was no single moment when everything suddenly made sense. Change, she realized, was quieter than that. It arrived one small choice at a time. She stopped checking real estate listings every morning. The stack of unpaid bills still sat on the kitchen table, but they no longer greeted her before the sunrise. Instead, Jennifer found herself carrying a cup of coffee across the dew-covered grass to the old shed before Noah was even awake. She would unlock the door, breathe in the familiar scent of cedar and old paper, and spend an hour reading another journal before the day truly began. Some mornings she laughed. Other mornings she cried so hard she had to stop reading altogether. Not because the stories were tragic, but because they were so deeply human. Thomas never wrote about hatred. Even after describing the people who had turned their backs on him, he rarely spoke with bitterness. Instead, he wrote about gratitude. Gratitude for Eleanor, for William, for one dinner table, where he never had to pretend to be someone else. Jennifer found herself wondering how one person could endure so much rejection without allowing it to harden his heart. She wasn't sure she could have done the same. One afternoon, Noah wandered into the shed carrying a cardboard box. "I found these in the attic." Inside were dozens of old picture frames, some empty, some holding faded family photographs. Noah carefully lined them along one wall. "What are you doing?" Jennifer asked with a smile. "I'm making this place look like people still live here." Jennifer looked around the little room. For a moment, it felt as though they did. Every letter, every photograph, every journal still carried the voices of people who had refused to let kindness disappear from the world. That evening, Jennifer hung the first framed photograph above the cedar chest. It was the same black and white picture of Eleanor, William, and Thomas standing beneath the apple trees. Noah stepped back and smiled. "They look happy." "Don't." "They were," Jennifer answered softly. "I think that's why Grandma kept all of this, not to remember sadness, to remember love." The following Sunday, something unexpected happened. After church, Martha Collins returned with two elderly neighbors. "I thought you might like to meet them," she said. "They knew your grandparents." The visitors wandered slowly through the shed. Neither of them spoke for several minutes. Finally, one gentleman removed his cap. "I haven't seen that photograph in over 50 years. His voice trembled. "I was just a boy. I remember Thomas." Jennifer looked at him with surprise. "You knew him?" The old man nodded. He was the gentlest soul I've ever met. He taught me how to prune apple trees. He smiled through misty eyes. My father always told me never to repeat the ugly things people said about him. He said good people deserve to be remembered for the lives they lived, not the rumors they survived. Jennifer felt tears filling her eyes. For the first time, Thomas was no longer simply a man inside old journals. Someone else remembered him. Someone else had carried his story all these years. Before leaving, the elderly man reached into his jacket pocket. "I've had this for decades." He handed Jennifer a faded photograph. On the back were only 6 handwritten words. "Thank you for giving me home." There was no signature. There didn't need to be. Jennifer carefully placed the photograph beside the others. That night, she couldn't sleep. She sat alone on the farmhouse porch, wrapped in her grandmother's old quilt. The orchard stretched quietly beneath the moonlight. The shed stood in the distance, its weathered outlines softened by silver light. Only a few weeks earlier, Jennifer had believed she had come to Vermont because she had nowhere else to go. Now she understood something entirely different. Perhaps she had been led there, not simply to inherit land, but to finish a story that someone else had protected for half a century. The next morning, she made another decision. She cleared one corner of the shed and placed a small notebook on a wooden table. Beside it, she wrote a simple sign. "If this place reminds you of someone you've loved or someone the world forgot, you're welcome to leave their story here." It wasn't a museum, it wasn't a business, it wasn't even a plan. It was simply an invitation. The first person to write in the notebook was Noah. In careful, uneven handwriting, he wrote, "My dad would have liked this place." Jennifer read the sentence twice before quietly closing the notebook. She realized that while she had spent weeks searching for a new home, Noah had already found one. And somewhere deep inside her heart, she had found one too. Spring arrived quietly in Vermont. The snow melted from the orchard. Tiny green buds appeared on the old apple trees, and for the first time in years, laughter could be heard drifting across the farm again. It had been almost a year since Jennifer first unlocked the weathered shed. The building looked different now, not newer, not polished, simply loved. The old rocking chair still rested beside the window. The cedar chest remained exactly where Eleanor had left it. The journals and letters were carefully preserved inside glass display cases built by neighbors who had volunteered their weekends. On one wall hung dozens of framed photographs donated by families throughout the county. Beneath them sat a simple wooden table with the notebook Jennifer had placed there months before. It was no longer empty. The first notebook had filled, then a second, then a third. People came from neighboring towns, carrying old letters they had never shared, military medals tucked away in forgotten drawers, wedding photographs, recipes written by mothers who were no longer alive. Even children began interviewing their grandparents before their stories disappeared forever. Jennifer had dreamed of saving one family's history. Instead, an entire community had begun saving its own. One Saturday afternoon, a local newspaper published an article about the little shed at the edge of the orchard. The headline read, "Where Forgotten Stories Find a Home." Within weeks, visitors arrived from across the state. Some came because they had heard about Thomas. Others came because they carried stories of their own. Jennifer welcomed every one of them the same way her grandmother once had, with coffee, fresh apple pie, and a listening heart. One afternoon, as she finished guiding a small group through the journals, Jennifer noticed a familiar car pulling slowly into the driveway. She recognized it immediately. Her heart skipped. It was her mother-in-law. For a long moment, neither woman moved. The years of hurt stood silently between them. Finally, The older woman stepped from the car. She looked smaller than Jennifer remembered. Older, more fragile. In her hands, she carried a faded cardboard box. "I wasn't sure you'd want to see me," she said quietly. Jennifer didn't answer right away. Instead, she simply waited. The older woman looked toward the shed. "I read the newspaper article." She swallowed hard. "I've spent months thinking about everything that happened after Daniel died." Tears gathered in her eyes. "I can't change what I did, but I wanted to tell you, I'm sorry." Jennifer had imagined this moment many times. She thought she would feel anger or satisfaction. Instead, she felt something unexpected. Peace, not because the past had disappeared, but because it no longer controlled her. Without saying a word, Jennifer reached for the shed door and slowly opened it. "You should come inside." Her mother-in-law hesitated. "I don't deserve that." "Maybe not," Jennifer replied gently, but neither did Thomas. Silence settled between them. Then, for the first time in many years, the older woman stepped forward. Inside the box were dozens of family photographs Jennifer had believed were lost forever. Pictures of Daniel as a little boy. Holiday dinners, birthday parties. One photograph showed Jennifer and Daniel dancing barefoot beneath the apple trees during their honeymoon. She had never seen it before. "I thought these belonged with you," her mother-in-law whispered. Jennifer carefully accepted the box. No dramatic speeches followed. No miracle erased years of pain. Some wounds heal slowly, others leave scars that never completely disappear. But forgiveness doesn't always begin with forgetting. Sometimes it begins by opening one more door. Later that evening, Noah stood beside his mother on the farmhouse porch as the sun slipped behind the orchard. "Mom, yeah, do you think Great-Grandma knew all this would happen?" Jennifer looked toward the little shed, glowing softly in the golden light. She smiled. "I don't think she knew exactly what would happen. I just think she believed that if enough people chose kindness, it would keep growing." Noah nodded thoughtfully. "I think she was right." Jennifer wrapped an arm around her son. Just 1 year earlier, she had arrived believing she'd lost everything that mattered. Her husband, her home, her future. Now she finally understood. The land had never been her grandmother's greatest gift. The old shed hadn't changed her life because of what it contained. It changed her because it reminded her that a home is never built from wood, bricks, or deeds. A true home is built every time someone chooses compassion over judgment, grace over resentment, and love over fear. Standing beneath the same apple trees that had witnessed generations of quiet courage, Jennifer realized she was no longer simply the keeper of her grandmother's story. She had become part of it. And perhaps one day someone else would open that old shed, read the first page of a worn journal, and discover exactly what Jennifer had found there. That the greatest inheritance we can ever leave behind is not land. It is the way we teach others to love. A few evenings later, after the last visitor had gone home, Jennifer stepped outside and quietly closed the old shed door. The orchard was peaceful. A gentle breeze carried the scent of apple blossoms through the fading light, while Noah sat beneath the oldest tree, reading one of his great-grandmother's journals as if he had known those people all his life. Jennifer smiled. Not long ago, she had stood beside a different door, one that had been locked behind her without mercy. That day, she believed she had lost everything that mattered. But standing there now, with the soft glow of the farmhouse windows behind her and the old shed before her, she finally understood something her grandmother had known all along. Sometimes life closes one door only because another has been waiting for us to find the courage to open it. Jennifer came to Vermont believing she had inherited a piece of land. She left that journey understanding she had inherited something no deed, no bank account, and no amount of money could ever hold. The courage to welcome the forgotten, the wisdom to choose compassion over resentment, and the responsibility to leave the world a little kinder than she found it. Perhaps that's the greatest lesson any of us can carry. Our real legacy is never the house we leave behind, the land we own, or the possessions we collect throughout our lives. Our real legacy lives in the people who feel safer because we loved them, the strangers who become family because we opened our hearts, and the quiet acts of kindness that continue long after our names have been forgotten. If this story has reminded you of someone you miss, someone who once gave you a place to belong, or someone whose story deserves to be remembered, don't wait for another tomorrow. Call them, write the letter, share the photograph, tell the story. Because memories fade, buildings grow old, and even the strongest hands will one day let go. But love, when it is freely given, has a remarkable way of outliving us all. Jennifer thought her grandmother had left her 11 acres of land. In truth, she left her a reason to believe in people again. And perhaps that's the greatest inheritance any of us could ever hope to receive. If this story touched your heart, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need this reminder today. Until next time, take care and never stop choosing kindness.